Hello, everybody, and welcome to our Application Modernization to Accelerate Business Growth webinar. My name is Susan Kudalakis, and I'm Marketing Manager here at Progress. Before we begin, I have a couple of housekeeping slides to show you the webinar control panel and how you can participate. First, to open and hide your control panel, you want to click on the orange highlighted arrow at the top shown here. All lines will be muted for today's session, and we'll be taking your questions throughout the presentation. If you have a question at any time, simply submit your question via the questions panel, and we'll address all questions at the end. One final note before I introduce you to our speakers, all of our speakers are working from home, so please forgive any background noise. We'll try to minimize that the best we can. We are recording this session. You'll receive a copy of the recording in the coming days. Let's start by quickly introducing today's speakers. I'm joined by Marv Stone, Principal Sales Engineer at Progress. Marv has been at Progress for the last 23 years and has been in the Progress community for over 30 years and is a frequent speaker at Progress partner, and user group events. Working with customers closely, he understands the risks that they face if their environment is not properly protected. Karthik Balasubramanian heads the Center of Excellence for Progress at JK Tech. He is an OpenEdge enthusiast and has spent 18 years consulting in OpenEdge. He has worked with global ISVs and enterprises designing Progress solutions. And last, Bryce Martin, Senior Application Development Manager at D&H Distributing. He joined the D&H team a little over 2 years ago, where he manages a team of 24 people. Prior to D&H, he worked as senior developer in the .NET stack at an insurance company and a printing company for 9 years. He got his start before that working on IBM mid-range in the manufacturing sector. I'm really excited to have Marv, Karthik, and Bryce with us today, and now I'll turn it over to Marv to start the presentation.
Thank you, Susan, and hello to everyone. Yes, my name is Marv Stone with Progress Software, and I'm going to talk to you for just a few minutes about Progress OpenEdge 12 and how the latest innovations in OpenEdge help you when you start down your modernization path. So when we talk to people about OpenEdge 12, the first thing we want to make sure they're aware of is that Progress continues to make a heavy investment in the OpenEdge product line. Version 12 is proof of that. Version 12 has significant improvements in scalability, performance, security, and agility. So Progress continues to invest in that product. And we're going to talk today specifically about what we did around availability and performance. Because when you start down a modernization path, you want to make sure that that underlying technology that's pinning your application, we want to make sure that it's available all the time, and that when it is available, that it's performing at the level that your users are expecting. So when you talk about availability, that conversation has to start with one of the newest innovations at Progress, and that's with the OpenEdge 12 Progress Application Server for OpenEdge. The Progress Application Server for OpenEdge, or PaaS-OE as we call it, is built on Tomcat, and it replaces the classic app server that we've had since version 8. The advantages of building it on an industry standard technology such as Tomcat is it allows us to integrate some of the components that were actually separately deployed in the classic app server. So in the classic app server, you needed a web server. You obviously had to have the app server itself, and then you had to have the adapters, which allowed the app server to speak outside of the OpenEdge world. Now, PaaS-OE was initially introduced in 11.5. We added additional functionality in the 11 family, and now in version 12, it is the principal application server for OpenEdge-based applications. If we look under the covers of PaaS-OE, you can kind of see why its availability was key when we were going through the design process. It starts with all these adapters. Whenever you have to make sure that your application is up and running all the time, the more external adapters that you lean on, those are more areas where the application could fail and could cause issues with availability. So things like web speed and REST services and other internet type connections, we depended on adapters to allow the application server to do that. Today, all those are bundled and are part of PaaS-OE. Secondly, many of you are familiar with the name server. The name server is what allowed the classic application server to have load balancing and failover capabilities, both critical in a high availability environment. Because PaaS-OE is built on Tomcat, it works with any off-the-shelf load balancer or failover solution that's targeted for Tomcat. Now, this includes our own load master product, which was part of the Kemp acquisition. When you're communicating with the application server, In the past, you had to know ahead of time who was going to be communicating with your application and how they were going to do that. Because of the new application server, all those sessions are managed centrally, and you don't have to have separate instances for each type of user that's connecting to your application. And then finally, if your application server is bogging down the server, so if it's using so many resources that it's causing performance issues, then it really doesn't matter if it's available because it's not performing well. So what we did in PassOE is we went to a multi-session agent, which uses significantly fewer resources than the traditional classic application server. So as a whole, Pass for OE is that first step in modernization in that it ensures that your new application will be available when your users expect it to be. And then the next step, once you're sure that an application is available, you want to make sure that it's performant because it really doesn't matter if users can get to the system if it's running sluggishly. Now, we always tell people that nothing affects the performance of the application like the application itself. And there's certainly some things that you can do in your environment to improve performance. But us as a technology provider, we took on the responsibility of making sure that your application performs as well as it can in the areas that we do control. And one of those areas is the database. Version 12 just has an overall performance improvement in database, but there are some specific things that we did. First, we improved the way that we allow people to gain access to the database. So memory control and memory management is significantly improved in version 12. Also, prior to version 12, the database was single threaded. It handled a single client request at a time, handled it very efficiently, but it was a single request at a time. With the multi-threaded database server, you can now reduce wait times for execution for when users are connecting to the database. And then finally, in the past, anytime you needed information from multiple tables, those joins had to be made on the client side. Today, we do that on the server. What that means to you is that when you pull a lot of records, you're only going to pull the records that you need. You're not going to pull a bunch of redundant records that aren't part of the query that you're trying to resolve. So all of these things taken together represent a big jump in performance from version 11. You can look on the screen here and you can see we did some transaction testing, and note down in the bottom left-hand corner, as always, your mileage may vary because, as I said, nothing affects performance of an application like the application. But the database is ready. The first bar you see there is OpenEdge 11. So we just ran some transaction testing. Then we took those same programs, compiled them on version 12, and just ran them again without making any changes. And you can see that we got a jump in performance. And then as we added each of the features that I just discussed on the database, we continued to get better performance. So when we turned on the memory management, and then we turned on multi-threading, and finally we turned on server-side joins, the same transaction that was running in version 11 continued to perform better and better. So performance and availability are just two areas where Progress has invested in OpenEdge, and it's areas that we continue to invest. But it is sort of the start of that journey as you start thinking about how you're going to modernize your application. Now, to take you on the next step of that journey, here's JK Tech.
Thank you, Marv. Hello, all. This is Karthik Balasubramanian. I'm an OpenEdge enthusiast in the industry for the last 18 years. Now, we're going to look at what we do at JK Tech with respect to progress. All right, so JK Tech is actually a part of a global conglomerate, which is the JK Group. JK Group has its presence, from aerospace and defense all the way to fashion and retail. Now, JK Tech is one of the companies within this group, which is JK Group, right? So the group in itself is a $7 billion revenue company, and the JK Tech has been having a very strong existence for over 20 plus years, right? We have a very strong employee engagement process, and we are 1,200 people overall within the company today, and we are having 25 plus customers whom we service. And we are primarily focused on two industry segments, right? One is the manufacturing CPG and retail sector, and we are also specialized in the healthcare sector. We are very recently partnered with QAD, and we have also been partnering with Progress for a very long time now. And very recently, we have been recognized as one of the first system integrator by Progress. So we also build emerging solutions in the market. So one of the main emerging solutions that we are building within the company is on the space of hyper automation. And we also have our own IP on the JK Tech Smart Dairy. So with this introduction about JK Tech, now I would like to move on with respect to the JK Tech Innovate Framework, which is very specific to the Progress OpenEdge modernization journey. And what you see here right now is the before considering modernization as a step, right? So there are a lot of business considerations which are being made as part of the application modernization. So one primary thing is the alignment with the business needs, right? The second point is around how user friendly are these applications are going to be when you actually start getting onto the modernization journey, and then overcoming the legacy barriers, right? So this is primarily because you have very rigid monolith systems out there built over the years. Certainly, if it has to scale up to the business standards as of today, the business requirements, you need to have a very different thought process. So that's where modernization journey needs to be undertaken. And then integration of both on-premise and cloud needs to happen pretty seamlessly, because there are data security is a given today, and with respect to the integrity and overall performance which has to be intact. So that's where there are a lot of choices to be made. Some things are going to be on cloud, there are some application components that are going to be on premise, and so on and so forth. So that's a business consideration to be made. And then overall stability and performance, because these are going to be essentially 24/7, needs to be up and running all the time. You need to have very, very minimal maintenance windows, if at all. So that's where these are the key business considerations, are the key business drivers that drive companies or towards application modernization as of today. The next thing we need to look before how we modernize things is on the technology considerations, right? So as part of the business considerations, keeping that in line, if you look at technology considerations, it's primarily the architecture. Is the architecture really the latest and the greatest which is being followed today, right? And how scalable it is, how futuristic it is, so that's something which has to be really looked upon very carefully. So that's a very important consideration to be made by the organizations. And because technology and architecture is so close that if you want performance systems, if you want really scalable and secured systems, the architecture has to be really, really robust. And then adopting, keeping in line with the industry compliance is absolutely important. We talked about data security is paramount today. The environment, in which you operate these IT systems is critical, and the overall usability of the data, right, is actually very, very important. And then next is there's a overall trend in the diminishing attention span of the users as of today, right? So that's where customer experience becomes very critical for any industry. So again, we need to deal about the optimal workflows to keep the customer really engaged, so that they keep coming back to the application all the time, right? And the kind of serviceability that we kind of give it to that customer is absolutely important. So that's core towards the customer experience. Now, these are the applications are becoming really vast. They're much more complex in nature, with a lot of moving parts, many systems talking to each other. That's where validation and verification becomes a key, right? So in order to maintain the quality of the application, right, it has to be really, the testing has to be automated, right? So manual testing becomes very, very cumbersome in these kind of situations. So that's where a very strong automation framework needs to be in place. There has to be a very robust test strategy that needs to be followed. And overall, with respect to the accessibility of the application, right, it is very, very key. And the performance engineering has to be kind of built in as part of the verification and validation process, because the amount of data that flows into the mission critical systems as of today, it's really growing by the size by every day, right? So that's where performance is a very, very key part. If the system has to be really quick and usable. And then security has been paramount. Because devices are going to be operated from anywhere in the world, the security is actually a key thing, and it has to be really very robust enough. And then the technology choices that we are making, it's very broad based as of today, right? So there are open source technologies available, there are licensed technologies available, the commercial off the shelf technologies available alongside the cloud, right? So the overall technology considerations which we need to make as part of the application modernization becomes very, very important, right? Now, what's the overall approach that we at JK Tech really recommend our customers, right? So this is the JK Tech Innovate framework that I've just talked about briefly, right? Essentially, this is a 4R framework which has 4 different components here, right? So one is the rehost component, there's a re-platforming, there's a refactoring and rebuilding exercise that we need to do. Rehosting is all about enabling users to the cloud, right? So it's about taking them from their on-premise environment to the cloud. So that's the journey of rehosting. Replatforming is about taking the applications, if they're running, let's say, on a dated version of Progress OpenEdge, anything less than OpenEdge 11.7, moving them into the latest platform. It's at least either 11.7, but preferably 12.2 and above, right? So that's where replatforming as a journey is, right? Which is very, very critical. And also there could be cases where a lot of the operating system platforms are on a, it's pretty much on, off the UOS, right? It needs to be kind of really up to date, right? So that's where replatforming of the operating system was also key, because many of the certified versions of OpenEdge actually are on the latest versions of the operating system, which are released as of today, right? So that's where it becomes key. The replatforming becomes key, and then the refactoring is all about really, how do you take the entire code base as of today which exists, and then if you want to build a new front end out of it, or and then the new business logic out of it, you actually try to restructure the code, but without really disturbing the overall business functionality, or the external behavior of the system remains unchanged, so business is not disrupted, but then you continue to build it in a very incremental fashion. So that's on the refactor part. The rebuild path is all about taking the application from a primarily a monolith architecture, right, which is the legacy architecture in most of the IT deployments as of today, to a more modern day architecture, which is the microservices, right? So here we are going to be, really incrementally rebuilding the application component by component, very similar to that of refactor. Here we are going to ensure that the business continuity is actually in place, and with respect to the overall existing legacy system that you see. So just giving you a brief in terms of how this looks purely from a Progress OpenEdge standpoint, right? So on the left-hand side, you see the current state of various applications, and then on the right-hand side, you see the desired state where it needs to be upon, once you actually, do any of this 4 Rs, right? The first thing is about, if you're refactoring, let's say a character user interface or a graphical user interface application or a client server or a 2-tier architecture application, we want to really go to a modern day platform, which is either on web and mobile UI, that's given today, and then it is to be definitely an entire architecture which is much more scalable compared to those 2-tier architectures. And then it needs, so what happens at the end of the refactoring exercises, these applications are really ready to leverage some of these cloud options that are, these become much more DevOps enabled, much more scalable in nature, right? So that's one of the key factors. Now, we talked about replatforming in the previous slides, essentially taking dated versions of Progress OpenEdge, or it could be a dated version of operating system onto the latest and greatest of the Progress OpenEdge version or the platform as such. And then we're talking about rehost. Again, rehost is all about what aspects of the application you want to take it to the cloud, right? It could be just the UIs, in which case it becomes only the front end to be moved on the cloud, or it could be business logic and the database both to be taken onto the cloud, or you make everything, your front end, your business logic, and the database all together, take everything onto the cloud, right? So there are different options by which you can get there. So the most desirable state is to have everything on cloud. Again, it depends on the business needs, right? It's purely driven by the business needs. But yeah, so these are different options available. Now we're talking about rebuild. This is where it's all about, breaking down that monolith application onto a micro front end type architecture, really having the business logics to be migrated towards a microservices architecture, right? So these are the essentially the key tenets of the rebuild as a methodology. Now, what we have is a very strong test automation framework, because as such, when you're modernizing these large applications, testing those applications and ensuring everything works fine after modernization actually is very, very key for business, right? So essentially, the JK Tech's test automation framework pretty much leverages the robotic process automation pretty heavily. We have partnered with UiPath and Automation Anywhere. And what we do is we actually train the bots with respect to the workflows. And now these bots are completely agnostic of the different technologies that you use within the application framework, right? Now, it could run off pretty well from different user interfaces also. So there is no limitation with respect to character user interface, GUI, or web. It can seamlessly work with all the three user interfaces at any point in time. So the bots are just essentially going to get trained from a workflow standpoint, and these are really low code frameworks. So what happens is, it generates a lot of code on its own. There is no need for any manual coding to be done. So the real coding effort is definitely going to be around the configurability and things like that, which is less than 5% is what we see. And the overall advantage of having a bot based testing is that it really improves the productivity. It brings in a lot of efficiency by eliminating the manual testing approach. As long as the workflows don't change, this is a very proven technique. And we have, with our existing customers, we have seen around 33% productivity gain by leveraging our JK Tech test automation framework. And these are very easy to deploy. We can deploy it in a very short span of time. We can, because this is all about training the bot to the workflow and then just trying to use them as it is. So we have been very, very successful in having this particular test automation framework being reused on many of our modernization journeys that we are doing it for various customers as of today. And I would like to touch upon the modernization engagement lifecycle, because we have a broad-based industry segment of customers that we support. We have a very proven 5-step approach towards modernizing and given application platform. So we have the discover phase, we have the assess phase, the strategize, deliver, and value realize phase. So as part of the discover and assess phase, essentially what we're trying to do is to do a business process discovery and overall mining of the entire ecosystem, right? And the outcome of this is actually we do a complete business impact analysis. We look at the overall technical feasibility with respect to modernization, right? And then we do a ROI analysis upfront. And then as part of the strategize phase, this is where we come up with real robust plans in terms of what needs to be the modernization plan out there, what needs to be the modernization strategy, how the go no go decision, how the metrics are going to be arrived at. So these are the kind of calls that we make within the strategize phase. These are very detailed ones. Once we come out of the discovery phase, we do that in the strategize phase. And then the deliver phase is all about incremental delivery. We practice agile framework, and it's a very proven SDLC way of delivering the software. So it's a very incremental process, and it's seamlessly integrated with any DevSecOps practices that are out there. And so transition to a new solution or the new modernize application in a very incremental way, kind of gives the users an early feedback mechanism as well in order to kind of get the feel of the new application, how it comes out. So that's essentially a key success factor with any modernization that we actually undertake with many of our customers. And then it's essentially very, very important to actually have the user onboarding and training as part of built into this process. End of day, it's the users who are benefiting by using these applications, right? So training or coaching them on the modernized application platform is a key thing. So that's pretty much built into this engagement framework that we have got. And then we have the value realization phase. Pretty much it's about measuring the ROIs. We pretty much look at overall what impact it has caused to the business after undergoing this entire modernization as a process. So that's essentially the 5-step robust delivery approach that we have got. And this is a proven approach. It has really worked with different industry segment, right? The customers across the different industry segments, and we see a value in actually following this. All right, so it's time for questions. I would strongly encourage participants on the webinar to use the chat window to drop in any questions. Now move to Bryce Martin. I would like to introduce Bryce Martin, from our Senior Application Development Manager from D&H. So Bryce, good to have you today on the webinar, and I have some few questions coming in, and I would like to kind of start asking you the question: what's your team responsible for at D&H?
Yeah, thanks, Kartik. So, as you can see, I'm in charge of the development of our core systems at D&H. So, my team is responsible for all of the main business systems that run our company. D&H is a technology distribution company. We do about $5 billion of revenue every year. And so a lot of our systems revolve around warehousing and warehouse management, our customer order management systems, and of course, accounting as well. We've developed those applications in-house over probably, the last couple of decades. And so, so my team is responsible for handling all of that.
Sure. Thank you, Bryce. The next follow-up question would be, since you've been using Progress, since when you have been a Progress customer?
Yeah, so I went back to the team to try to figure that out. Progress has been in D&H for quite a long time, over 20 years at this point. Nobody could give me an exact date. That's how long we've been doing it. So we've been using Progress for a long time. All of the core applications are developed in Progress's OpenEdge ABL language. They have a lot of specialized integrations with both internal applications and a lot of COTS applications for specialization in areas like shipping and other stuff. When I first got here 2 years ago, we were migrating from 10.2b to 11.7.6, and then last year we made the minor version bumps to 11.7.9. Currently, we are prepping for 12. We are going live in July with our PASO-E upgrade, so we can be ready for that.
Great, thanks, Bryce. And how has JK Tech been assisting you with the application modernization journey so far?
Yeah, so I mean, anybody that's had any application live in your ecosystem for 10, 20 years is going to know the pain of technical debt. A few years ago, before I got here, we needed to undertake some different business improvements, and that meant heavily changing up some areas of our core systems. One of the things that we needed to do is to be able to supplement our team while we did those efforts, and that's where JK Tech came in. So we've been working with JK Tech for about 4 years now, and we engaged them, I think, a little bit differently than some folks might. We've engaged them in a really long-term kind of really closely integrated manner. We don't do it on a project-by-project basis. So we've had the core group of developers. I have 5 from JK Tech that do progress development, and most of them have been there for the full 4-year cycle so far. We've had a couple that have turned over, but not too many at all. And so, yeah, so when we undertook those big projects, we had the JK team there to help support us and kick off other large projects. So over the last couple of years that I've been here, there have been 2 big efforts that the JK Tech team themselves have been spearheading and worked on the vast majority of, and that was we rewrote our RF guns applications in the warehouse. So we moved from a Java front end that had like an RPC connection to our ABL code. We migrated that to an Angular front end on the guns themselves with REST APIs running on PASOE and migrated to actually an object-oriented style out of a procedural style for that API as well. And then just this last fall, in preparation for the PASOE upgrade, we needed to fully get all of the COM objects out of our system. And so we migrated our email programs to use .NET DLLs. And so JK Tech folks did all the analysis. They did the solutioning of that new classes are going to be used for that, and then fully implemented that. That was 400 and some different programs where we do emailing out of. So it was a really big lift, and it successfully went live here this spring.
Great to hear, Bryce. Thank you so much for that. And I would encourage audience to push as many questions as possible. All right, now I'll pass this over to Marv for any questions on the chat box. Marv, do you want to check it out for any questions on the chat box that we have received so far?